Your soulmate is already married, but what they did next will shock you. Listen carefully, because this story begins with a moment your soulmate never expected to experience, and your heart needs this right now. For the longest time, they believed their life was already written. Every day followed a familiar rhythm. Responsibilities filled their schedule, expectations shaped their decisions, and the future seemed predictable. From the outside, everything appeared stable. People looked at their life and assumed they had everything figured out. Yet deep inside, there was a quiet feeling they rarely spoke about. It wasn't unhappiness. It wasn't regret. It was simply a feeling that there were still questions left unanswered. Questions about purpose, growth, and whether they were truly becoming the person they were meant to be. For years, those questions remained hidden beneath routines and obligations. They convinced themselves there would always be time to think about those things later. But life has a strange way of bringing important truths to the surface when we least expect it. One ordinary day, something happened that changed the way they viewed everything. It wasn't a dramatic event. It wasn't a shocking discovery. It was a moment of reflection. A moment when they finally slowed down long enough to hear their own thoughts clearly. Suddenly, they found themselves looking back over the years, remembering people, conversations, and experiences that had influenced them. Memory after memory appeared in their mind. Some brought smiles. Some brought lessons. Some brought emotions they thought had disappeared long ago. The deeper they reflected, the more they realized that certain people had left a much greater impact on their life than they had ever acknowledged. And listen to this. Among all those memories, one connection stood out more clearly than the others. It wasn't because of romance or fantasy. It was because of meaning. There was something about that connection that continued returning to their thoughts no matter how much time passed. Certain conversations remained vivid. Certain lessons remained important. Certain moments continued inspiring them even years later. The more they reflected, the more they realized that this connection had quietly influenced the way they viewed the world. At first, they tried to dismiss it. They told themselves they were simply being nostalgic. They told themselves everyone occasionally reflects on meaningful people from their past. Yet the thoughts kept returning. Every attempt to ignore them only made them stronger. Every effort to move on from the reflection somehow led them back to the same realization. The truth was that some people enter your life and leave a permanent mark. Some people become part of your personal growth story. Some people help shape who you become without even realizing it. That realization affected your soulmate more deeply than they expected. Because once they understood it, they could no longer pretend it wasn't there. They started noticing how often those memories appeared during important moments. During challenges, they remembered lessons connected to that person. During successes, they remembered encouragement that helped them keep moving forward. During moments of uncertainty, they remembered conversations that changed their perspective. Looking back, they could see evidence everywhere. The connection had quietly become part of their emotional foundation. And your heart needs this right now because the shocking thing wasn't what they discovered about another person. The shocking thing was what they discovered about themselves. They realized they had spent years focusing on responsibilities while neglecting deeper questions about who they were becoming. They realized they had been so busy meeting expectations that they rarely stopped to ask whether they were growing in the direction that truly mattered. The reflection forced them to confront those questions honestly. For the first time in a long time, they stopped worrying about appearances and started paying attention to authenticity. What kind of person did they want to become? What values mattered most? What lessons deserved to guide their future? Those questions stayed with them day after day. And listen to this, instead of running from those questions, they embraced them. They started journaling. They started reflecting more deeply. They started paying attention to the things that genuinely inspired them. The process wasn't easy. Self-discovery rarely is. It requires honesty. It requires courage. It requires a willingness to face truths that may be uncomfortable. Yet your soulmate kept going. Every answer led to another question. Every realization revealed another layer of understanding. Slowly, they began seeing their life through a completely different lens. They started recognizing patterns they never noticed before. They started appreciating people they once took for granted. They started understanding how certain relationships had helped shape their character. Most importantly, they began realizing that meaningful connections are not measured only by time. They are measured by impact. Some people spend years together and change very little. Others cross paths briefly and leave lessons that last forever. That understanding changed everything. Suddenly, they felt grateful in ways they had never felt before. Grateful for experiences. Grateful for growth. Grateful for every conversation that helped them become stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. The more gratitude they felt, the more emotional the journey became. Because gratitude has a way of revealing what truly matters. It highlights the people, moments, and lessons that deserve appreciation. And as your soulmate continued reflecting, they found themselves repeatedly returning to the same conclusion. Certain connections remain important because they represent something bigger than themselves. They represent growth. They represent understanding. They represent the parts of our journey that help shape who we are today. By the end of this chapter, your soulmate understood something they had never fully understood before. The biggest surprise was not a dramatic event. It was the realization that growth sometimes begins when we stop looking outward and start looking inward. It was the realization that meaningful people often leave a lasting impact long after individual moments have passed. It was the realization that some connections become part of your story forever, not because of circumstance, but because of the lessons, strength, and inspiration they leave behind. And as they sat quietly reflecting on everything they had learned, one truth became impossible to ignore. The journey they thought was already written was only beginning, and the understanding they gained from this realization was about to change the way they viewed themselves, their future, and the people who mattered most in their life. Listen carefully, because after the powerful realization your soulmate experienced, they could no longer return to life exactly the way it had been before, and your heart needs this right now. The truth is that once someone begins questioning the path they have been walking, every part of life starts looking different. The routines that once felt automatic suddenly become meaningful. The choices that once seemed obvious suddenly deserve examination. The relationships, memories, and experiences that shaped them begin appearing in a new light. That is exactly what happened to your soulmate. In the days following their moment of reflection, they found themselves thinking deeply about the person they had become over the years. They thought about the dreams they once carried, the goals they pursued, the lessons they learned through hardship, and the people who influenced them along the way. As they reflected, one realization became impossible to ignore: growth is not something that ends when a chapter of life begins. Growth continues. It evolves. It asks new questions and reveals new truths. And listen to this: your soulmate started noticing that many of the most important lessons they carried were connected to meaningful people who entered their life at exactly the right moment. Some offered encouragement when confidence was low. Some offered wisdom during confusion. Some inspired change simply by being themselves. Looking back, your soulmate realized that these connections had quietly shaped their character in ways they never fully appreciated before. They began remembering conversations that stayed with them long after they ended. They remembered moments that seemed ordinary at the time but later proved life-changing. They remembered advice that guided them through difficult periods. The deeper they reflected, the clearer everything became. Every meaningful interaction had contributed to the person they are today. Every lesson had become part of their foundation. Every experience had left a mark. Your soulmate found this realization both comforting and emotional because it reminded them that life is not just a collection of events. It is a collection of influences, relationships, lessons, and moments that slowly build the story of who we become. And your heart needs this right now because your soulmate began understanding that gratitude is one of the most powerful emotions a person can experience. The more they reflected on their journey, the more grateful they became. They felt grateful for challenges because those challenges taught resilience. They felt grateful for uncertainty because uncertainty taught courage. They felt grateful for meaningful people because those people revealed strengths they never knew they possessed. This growing sense of gratitude started changing the way they approached daily life. Instead of rushing through each day, they became more mindful. Instead of focusing only on responsibilities, they began paying attention to meaning. Instead of asking what they needed to accomplish next, they started asking what truly mattered. These questions led them toward a deeper understanding of themselves. And listen to this. As their self-awareness increased, they realized there were parts of themselves they had neglected for years. Not because they intended to ignore them, but because life became busy. Responsibilities have a way of demanding attention. Expectations have a way of shaping priorities. Over time, people sometimes lose touch with the parts of themselves that once felt most authentic. Your soulmate began reconnecting with those forgotten parts. They revisited old passions. They reflected on values that mattered deeply to them. They thought about the person they hoped to become in the future. The process felt both exciting and challenging because self-discovery rarely happens without honesty. It requires looking inward. It requires confronting fears. It requires acknowledging truths that may have been hidden beneath years of routine. Yet your soulmate welcomed the process because they sensed something important happening. They felt themselves becoming more aligned with who they truly are. Every reflection brought greater clarity. Every realization brought greater confidence. Every lesson brought greater understanding. And your heart needs this right now, because one of the biggest discoveries they made involved the difference between existing and truly living. For a long time, they had focused on doing what was expected. They handled responsibilities. They met obligations. They followed the path laid out before them. But now they were asking deeper questions. Were they living with intention? Were they honoring their values? Were they appreciating the people who mattered most? Were they becoming the person they genuinely wanted to be? These questions transformed the way they viewed everything. They stopped measuring success solely by accomplishments. They started measuring it by growth, integrity, gratitude, and purpose. That shift changed their outlook completely. Suddenly, experiences felt more meaningful. Relationships felt more valuable. Small moments felt more important. And listen to this, during this period of reflection, your soulmate realized that some of the most meaningful influences in life come from unexpected places. Sometimes a person enters your story and leaves behind lessons that continue helping you years later. Sometimes a simple conversation changes the way you view the world. Sometimes a connection inspires growth long after circumstances have changed. These realizations stayed with them because they highlighted something powerful. Meaningful people never truly disappear from the chapters they help shape. Their influence remains. Their lessons remain. Their impact remains. The more your soulmate reflected on this truth, the more emotional they became. Not because they were dwelling on the past, but because they were finally appreciating it. They were finally recognizing how every important experience contributed to their journey. They were finally understanding how every meaningful connection helped build the person they are today. By the end of this chapter, one truth stood above all the others. The shocking thing was never a dramatic action or unexpected event. The shocking thing was the transformation happening inside them. It was the realization that life becomes richer when lived with awareness. It was the realization that gratitude reveals what truly matters. It was the realization that growth never stops, no matter what chapter of life a person is in. And as your soulmate continued walking this path of reflection, self-discovery, and understanding, they could feel themselves moving toward a future shaped not by habit or expectation, but by authenticity, purpose, and a deeper appreciation for the people and lessons that helped make them who they are today. Listen carefully, because after everything your soulmate had been realizing about themselves, their life, and the people who had shaped their journey, something even more surprising began to happen, and your heart needs this right now. The truth is that self-discovery never arrives all at once. It unfolds gradually, revealing new layers of understanding each time a person becomes brave enough to look deeper. That is exactly where your soulmate found themselves. What began as a simple period of reflection was slowly transforming into a complete shift in perspective. Every day seemed to bring a new realization. Every quiet moment seemed to uncover another truth. Every memory seemed to connect to a lesson they had overlooked for far too long. For years, they had focused so much on responsibilities, expectations, and routines that they rarely stopped to ask themselves how they truly felt about the direction of their life. They handled what needed to be handled. They fulfilled obligations. They did what was expected. Yet beneath all of that, there was a part of them quietly waiting to be heard. A part that wanted more meaning, more awareness, and more connection to the things that genuinely mattered. As they continued reflecting, they started noticing how often they had placed their own personal growth on hold. Not intentionally. Not because they lacked ambition. Simply because life became busy. One day turned into another. One responsibility led to the next. Before they knew it, years had passed. Yet now, for the first time in a very long while, they were paying attention. They were listening to themselves. They were asking questions they had never allowed themselves to ask before. What kind of person did they truly want to become? What values mattered most? What lessons deserved to guide the next chapter of their life? And listen to this. The more honestly they answered those questions, the more they realized that many of the most important influences in their life had come from meaningful connections they once underestimated. They started remembering people who inspired them without realizing it. They remembered conversations that changed their perspective. They remembered moments that seemed ordinary at the time but later became turning points. Looking back, they could see how those experiences quietly shaped their character. Every challenge taught resilience. Every setback taught patience. Every meaningful interaction taught something valuable. The deeper they reflected, the more grateful they became. Gratitude began appearing everywhere. They felt grateful for mistakes because mistakes created wisdom. They felt grateful for difficult periods because those periods revealed strength. They felt grateful for uncertainty because uncertainty taught courage. Most importantly, they felt grateful for the people who entered their life and helped them grow into a stronger version of themselves. That realization affected them more deeply than they expected. Because once gratitude begins revealing what truly matters, it becomes impossible to ignore. And your heart needs this right now because your soulmate started understanding something powerful. The most important relationships are not always the ones that receive the most attention. Sometimes the relationships that shape us most are the ones that quietly influence our thinking, our values, and our perspective over time. As they reflected on this truth, they noticed something changing inside them. They felt calmer, more present, more aware. The worries that once dominated their thoughts seemed less important. The expectations that once controlled their decisions seemed less powerful. Instead of focusing on what everyone else wanted, they started paying attention to what felt authentic. Instead of chasing approval, they began pursuing alignment with their own values. This shift transformed the way they viewed daily life. Small moments became meaningful again. Conversations felt more important. Experiences felt richer. Every day became an opportunity to learn something new about themselves. And listen to this. One of the most surprising discoveries involved the concept of purpose. For years, they believed purpose was something large and dramatic. They thought it had to involve major achievements or life-changing accomplishments. But during this period of reflection, they realized purpose often appears in much simpler forms. Purpose can be found in kindness. Purpose can be found in growth. Purpose can be found in helping others, learning new lessons, and becoming a better version of yourself every day. This understanding changed everything. Suddenly, they stopped measuring success solely through external accomplishments. Instead, they started measuring it through integrity, gratitude, and personal growth. They began asking different questions. Did they act according to their values today? Did they appreciate the people who mattered? Did they learn something meaningful? Did they contribute something positive to the world around them? Those questions brought a sense of fulfillment they had not experienced in a long time. The more they embraced this mindset, the more confident they became about the future. Not because they suddenly had all the answers, but because they finally trusted themselves to keep growing. They finally trusted themselves to navigate uncertainty with wisdom instead of fear. They finally trusted themselves to make decisions based on authenticity rather than expectations. And your heart needs this right now, because this transformation was not happening on the surface. It was happening deep within. It was changing the way they viewed relationships. It was changing the way they viewed challenges. It was changing the way they viewed themselves. Every realization built upon the one before it. Every lesson strengthened their understanding. Every moment of honesty brought them closer to clarity. By this point, they could feel that something significant was happening. They were not becoming a different person. They were becoming a more authentic version of who they had always been. The distractions were fading. The noise was fading. The expectations were fading. What remained was truth. Truth about what mattered. Truth about what inspired them. Truth about the kind of future they wanted to create. Looking back, they realized that this journey of self-discovery had already changed them more than they ever imagined possible. It taught them to appreciate the present. It taught them to value meaningful connections. It taught them that growth is a lifelong process rather than a destination. Most importantly, it taught them that the most surprising transformations often happen quietly. They happen during moments of reflection. They happen when people stop running from difficult questions and start embracing them. They happen when someone finally decides to live with greater awareness, gratitude, and intention. And as your soulmate continued moving forward, carrying all these lessons into the next chapter of their journey, one truth became clearer than ever before: the biggest shock was never something happening around them. It was the incredible transformation happening within them, a transformation that was steadily guiding them toward a future built on authenticity, wisdom, purpose, and a deeper understanding of what truly matters most. Listen carefully, because after everything your soulmate had discovered about themselves, their values, and the deeper meaning behind the people who influenced their journey, they arrived at a stage where reflection started turning into action, and your heart needs this right now. The truth is that self-awareness changes people. Once someone begins seeing life through a clearer lens, it becomes difficult to continue living exactly as they did before. The habits that once felt comfortable start feeling limiting. The assumptions that once felt certain start being questioned. The priorities that once controlled every decision begin shifting toward something more meaningful. That is exactly what was happening to your soulmate. Day by day, they felt themselves becoming more connected to their authentic self. They started noticing how much energy they had spent trying to meet expectations instead of understanding their own heart. They realized that for years they had been so focused on responsibilities and obligations that they rarely stopped to appreciate how much they had grown. Looking back over their journey, they could see moments where life challenged them, moments where they felt lost, moments where they doubted themselves, and moments where they nearly gave up. Yet they could also see something else. They could see how every challenge carried a lesson. They could see how every setback created resilience. They could see how every meaningful person who entered their life left behind wisdom that continued helping them long after circumstances changed. And listen to this, one realization became impossible to ignore. The people who leave the strongest impact are not always the people who spend the most time with us. Sometimes the most meaningful influences come through a few conversations, a few shared experiences, or a few moments that arrive exactly when they are needed. Your soulmate started recognizing how certain connections had shaped the way they viewed trust, kindness, courage, and growth. These influences had become part of their identity. They had become part of the foundation supporting the person they were becoming. The more they reflected on this truth, the more grateful they felt. Gratitude became a daily presence in their life. Instead of focusing on what was missing, they started appreciating what existed. Instead of dwelling on regrets, they started valuing lessons. Instead of worrying about the future, they started embracing the opportunities available in the present moment. This shift created a deep sense of peace. Not because life suddenly became perfect, but because they stopped fighting against reality and started learning from it. They began paying closer attention to simple moments. A meaningful conversation. A quiet evening. A memory that appeared unexpectedly. A lesson that finally made sense after years of confusion. These small experiences carried a depth they had never fully appreciated before. And your heart needs this right now because your soulmate was discovering that true fulfillment often comes from awareness rather than achievement. For a long time, they believed happiness would arrive when certain goals were reached. They believed peace would appear when everything was finally under control. But now they understood something different. They understood that fulfillment grows when people appreciate the journey instead of constantly chasing the destination. This realization changed the way they approached every part of life. They became more patient, more thoughtful, more intentional. They started asking themselves better questions. Instead of asking how quickly they could move forward, they asked whether they were moving in the right direction. Instead of asking what others expected, they asked what aligned with their values. Instead of asking what looked successful, they asked what felt meaningful. The answers to those questions gradually reshaped their perspective. And listen to this, one of the most powerful lessons they learned involved authenticity. They realized that many people spend years trying to become what they think they should be while ignoring who they already are. Your soulmate had done this too. They had spent time trying to fit expectations, fulfill roles, and follow paths that seemed logical. Yet now they were discovering the freedom that comes from authenticity. They were learning that real confidence does not come from approval. It comes from alignment. It comes from knowing your values and living according to them. The more authentic they became, the lighter they felt emotionally. The fears that once seemed overwhelming began losing their power. The doubts that once controlled decisions became quieter. In their place appeared something stronger, clarity. They finally understood that growth is not about becoming someone new. Growth is about becoming more fully yourself. This realization brought a sense of excitement they had not felt in years. They felt optimistic about the future. Not because they knew exactly what would happen, but because they trusted themselves to handle whatever came next. They trusted their ability to learn, adapt, and continue growing. They trusted the lessons life had taught them. Most importantly, they trusted the wisdom they had gained through reflection. And your heart needs this right now, because this chapter was never really about dramatic events. It was about transformation. It was about someone slowly waking up to the deeper meaning of their own journey. It was about someone recognizing that every challenge, every lesson, every connection, and every experience contributed to who they are today. As these realizations continued deepening, your soulmate found themselves looking toward the future with a completely different perspective. They no longer saw the future as something to fear. They saw it as an opportunity. An opportunity to live with greater purpose. An opportunity to appreciate meaningful relationships. An opportunity to continue growing into the person they were meant to become. And as they stood at this point in their journey, carrying all the wisdom, gratitude, and self-awareness they had gained, one truth became clearer than ever before. The most shocking part of their story was not a single decision or dramatic moment, but the incredible transformation that happened when they finally chose to live with honesty, awareness, and a deeper understanding of what truly matters in life. Listen carefully, because this is the final chapter of the journey your soulmate has been experiencing, and your heart needs this right now. After all the reflection, self-discovery, gratitude, and personal growth they had gone through, your soulmate arrived at a realization that changed the way they viewed everything. The truth is that the biggest transformations in life rarely happen overnight. They happen slowly, quietly, and often without anyone else noticing. Day after day, lesson after lesson, a person begins seeing themselves differently. That is exactly what happened here. For so long, your soulmate believed that life was mainly about meeting responsibilities, fulfilling expectations, and following the path that seemed most practical. There was nothing wrong with those things, but over time they realized something important was missing. They had become so focused on doing what needed to be done that they rarely stopped to appreciate how much they had learned, how much they had grown, and how many meaningful influences had helped shape the person they had become. As they looked back over their journey, they began seeing patterns they had never noticed before. Every challenge seemed connected to a lesson. Every setback seemed connected to a period of growth. Every meaningful relationship seemed connected to a deeper understanding of themselves. And listen to this, the more they reflected, the more they realized that life is not measured only by achievements. It is measured by growth. It is measured by wisdom. It is measured by the way people change us and the way we change ourselves. This realization created a profound sense of gratitude inside them. They felt grateful for the difficult days because those days revealed strengths they never knew they possessed. They felt grateful for uncertainty because uncertainty taught them resilience. They felt grateful for mistakes because mistakes became teachers. Most importantly, they felt grateful for the people who entered their life and left behind lessons that continued guiding them long after specific moments had passed. As these reflections deepened, your soulmate began understanding that some of the most meaningful experiences in life are not dramatic at all. Sometimes the most important moments happen during quiet reflection. Sometimes they happen when a person finally understands why certain memories remain important. Sometimes they happen when someone recognizes how deeply a lesson has influenced their perspective. These realizations stayed with them because they revealed a truth that felt impossible to ignore. Every experience matters. Every chapter contributes something valuable. Every person who enters our lives has the potential to leave behind wisdom, understanding, and growth. And your heart needs this right now because your soulmate started seeing their future differently than ever before. Instead of focusing only on goals and outcomes, they began focusing on intention. Instead of asking what they could accomplish, they started asking who they wanted to become. Instead of measuring success through external achievements alone, they began measuring it through authenticity, integrity, and personal growth. This shift changed everything. It made everyday moments feel more meaningful. It made relationships feel more valuable. It made gratitude feel more natural. The more they embraced this new perspective, the more peace they felt. Not because life suddenly became perfect, but because they finally stopped chasing an image of fulfillment and started creating genuine fulfillment from within. And listen to this, one of the most powerful discoveries they made was that authenticity requires courage. It takes courage to examine your life honestly. It takes courage to question assumptions. It takes courage to admit when your priorities need adjusting. It takes courage to become more aligned with your true values. Your soulmate realized that many people spend years avoiding those difficult questions. Yet once they began asking them, they discovered something remarkable. The answers were not frightening. The answers were freeing. Every realization brought clarity. Every lesson brought confidence. Every moment of honesty brought them closer to understanding themselves. Looking back now, they can see how every stage of this journey was necessary. The challenges taught strength. The uncertainties taught patience. The meaningful connections taught gratitude. The reflection taught wisdom. Together, these experiences created a transformation that changed them from the inside out. And your heart needs this right now because the shocking thing was never a dramatic event. It was the realization that true change happens when a person finally becomes fully aware of their own journey. It was the realization that growth never stops. It was the realization that meaningful people and meaningful lessons continue shaping us long after individual moments pass. As your soulmate stands at the end of this chapter, they feel something they have not felt in a very long time: clarity. Clarity about who they are. Clarity about what matters. Clarity about the kind of future they want to create. They understand now that life is not about perfection. It is about learning. It is about appreciating the lessons hidden within every experience. It is about becoming wiser, kinder, and more authentic with each passing year. Most importantly, they understand that the greatest surprise of all was not something that happened around them, it was the transformation that happened within them. A transformation built through reflection, gratitude, growth, and self-awareness. And as they move forward into the next chapter of their life, carrying every lesson they have learned and every piece of wisdom they have gained, one truth remains stronger than ever before: the most powerful journeys are not the ones that change our circumstances, but the ones that change our understanding of ourselves, and that realization has become the found.